Good everyone. I hope you're having an amazing day. So today I'm going to talk about Apex triggers. Apex triggers are very important if you're dealing with Apex code side of things. There are certain things which you can do without using codes. You can use flows, you can use process builder. But that being said, you might have to use Apex triggers based on your business requirement. So today I'm going to focus fully on Apex code. That's to create a trigger using a code, right? So the first thing first, so I expect you to have an org, okay? If you haven't done so, please register for one. It's pretty straightforward to do so. I've talked about it a zillions of times. So I logged into my org, okay? So we're going to work on a very simple scenario, okay? So I have this custom object, which is um, a beer sold. So the beer sold custom object, it records, it captures information about uh, the kind of beer or type of beer that you sell to a customer, right? So let me do a new. So these are the two record types. I have strong beer and mild beer, right? If you go to strong beer, okay, so you have a beer type, kind of beers, type of beers, right? That's a porter or stout, right? You can add other stuff as well, but to keep it simple, I just stick to two types. An account, you have to link to an account, right? And quantity, okay? So behind the scene, it calculates the price and displays it, okay? So what I wanted to do, okay, I wanted to add a checkbox here, okay? So let me add a checkbox. Then we slowly work towards the business requirement. It's a very simple requirement, and then we build Apex triggers, and I can explain it to you as well while I'm doing what triggers can do and kinds of types of triggers, right? Because it's always good to explain to you using a scenario, right? Because it makes sense. You can relate to it. Okay, so let's go and create Um, so let me go here. So this is a very basic um, BSOL, dummy data looks like. So let me go to the BSOL object. As you know that you can go using this gearcog icon, edit object. It will take you to the object manager, right? Straight away to the beer sold. Okay. So let me add a new field called a checkbox, and let's of type. Sorry, field of type checkbox. Um, so we will name it include doc. Okay, so we just keep it very simple, nothing fancy about it. Make it visible to all. I mean, okay, and you can do save, right? Okay, so we have something called include doc. Okay, so what I wanted to do, right? So when I create this, when when I create this object, right? So I create this record. The include doc flag by default will be unticked. Okay, that flag should only be ticked if you upload a document here, something like this, right? So if you upload a document here, it should go and tick that flag. Okay, that's the basic requirement. So I repeat it again. So I have this beer sold object. Okay, so I create a new record, right? To say, okay, I'm gonna ship this type of beer to a customer, right? XYZ customer, right? And once that record is created, that flag by default include doc, which we created just now, will be unticked, okay? Because there's no document attached yet, okay? So now, if you go to notes and attachment, and if you attach a document, that flag should be ticked, okay? So that's the requirement is. So we're gonna build a trigger, okay, based on this, okay? That's the thing which we're gonna do. Now, triggers are of different types, right? So you might be thinking, right? Hang on a second. This guy talking about trigger, but what the heck is trigger to begin with, right? What is trigger at first place? And because you must be thinking, I've been keeping on talking about trigger. I'm gonna do this trigger, that trigger, but what is trigger, right? Trigger, if you look at the name itself, trigger, right? triggering something based on an event, right? Let's say um, you're inserting a data, right, to a Salesforce. Okay, so insert, that's an operation, right? So when the insert app happens, right, you want something to happen. Let's say I want a field to be updated when you insert let's say I wanted to create an account. Okay, so I'm inserting an account, right? So I want to have a condition in place when you insert an account. If for whatever reason, if the status field is untouched, right? If the status field is not set, I want a trigger to do that for me behind the scene. Okay, so I repeat it again. So I'm creating an account. Okay, so when you create an account, you enter a name, you enter other stuff, right? And there's a status field as well, right, on an account object. Okay, so I want the trigger to update that status field to say active or whatever, right? So that can happen on a before insert trigger. There are before insert, the before, or you can there are another trigger called after insert. So there are another triggers as well. So let's focus on before insert, right? So before insert, is a kind of trigger which get triggered, right, when you are trying to insert something. Okay, so before the data actually gets inserted into the Salesforce, that trigger gets kicks in, right? So that's normally used for validation, just to make sure you have a right data. Data integrity is very important, right? Just to make sure that you have a right data going into the um, Salesforce database. So the before insert gets kicks in then. Okay, after insert, you have data gone into the Salesforce um, database. Then after that, whatever stuff you wanted to do. Okay, that's where after insert comes in the picture. Okay, now we have another trigger called before update, after update. Right? If you're doing an update, let's say you have already have an account object, you wanted to modify something, right? So before the data gets saved, before update kicks in, right? And once the data get updated, after update triggers kicks in, right? And we have before delete and after delete is pretty much the same concept I explained. Respect is similar to before update or before insert. Before anything you delete, it gets kicks in. Before delete and after delete, um, whenever data get deleted, right? So these are the basic things you have to understand. There are other stuff as well, but just wanted to keep it very simple because this is the first lecture. And this is a very basic introduction to Apex, so I do not want to go very deep inside. So just to give you context, these are the things you have to understand, right? Trigger is like an activity that's been performed based on an event, right? For instance, right, you're visiting McDonald's, right? McDonald's has a drive-through coffee place, right? McCafe. So, you wanted to buy a hamburger, but for some reason you felt the smell of a coffee, right? So that's kind of that triggered you to buy a coffee, right? Because of the smell, right? Something triggered it, right? And what triggered it? The smell of a coffee, right? So that's the same analogy. You can use it here on Salesforce, okay? So now what we're going to do, we're going to write a trigger, okay? So I'm going to write a trigger on a content document link object. So that's an object which stores the information about attachments, right? So let's do a trigger now, okay? So the first thing first, you need to go to Developer Console. The way to go to Developer Console by going to the scarecrow icon and Developer Console. It will take you to okay. It will take you to the Developer Console here. Okay. Forget about this one. Let's write a trigger. Okay. So it's very easy to write a trigger. So go to File, New, Apex Trigger. Okay. And name of a trigger. You can say attachment trigger. Oh no, this isn't because since you are dealing with content. I'm going to teach you some good practice. Unfortunately, I won't be teaching you design patterns because ideally, when you write a trigger, you should follow a good design pattern because it will be easier for you to maintain the code. Because I've seen a lot of shitty code out there. Sorry for my language, but I can't express it better than this. You know, you have to write in a very good way, right? Because that's why the design patterns are very important. So for now, I won't be covering that because there's separate lectures I've talked about design patterns. So for now, we stick to very simple stuff. Okay. Um, Content document trigger. Please use a valid naming convention based on your company's requirement, coding standard, whatever you guys follows. It's always good to give a meaningful name. So we look for something called content document link. Okay, so we're going to create a trigger on this because, as I said, right, whenever you attach a document, right, when you attach a document, um, it will not. So when you attach a document, information gets stored in this object. Okay, so we're going to click on submit. Okay, so we're going to do after insert, right? So this is what I wanted. So once the data get inserted, after that I wanted to perform an action. Okay. So this is the syntax. So I'll explain to you in a second. Okay. All right. So trigger, obviously this is a trigger. This is a name. Okay. This is a name of a trigger, and you're saying on. So where exactly you're trying to apply a trigger on this object. It's similar to a trigger on a database, right? If you have used SQL Server before or Oracle before, you might know. If you haven't, that's all good. No worries. Okay, and then we are specifying what kind of trigger it is, right? After insert, if you wanted to perform more than one action, you can also do, excuse me, before insert. So it will get called whenever there's a before insert or after insert operation, right? So you can also do, if you wanted to do before update as well. It's totally up to you. The problem you're trying to solve. In my case, in this case, I'm only interested in after insert. Okay, excuse me, because what we are after is, once you upload a document, it should go and fire the object and update the flag, right? That's pretty much it is. So let me show you what I meant by that. Let's go to this. Okay, let's create a new beer sold. Okay, we're gonna do new. Okay, and we're just gonna let's do mild beer. Okay, beer type. Let's do lager. Just gonna do Drazan account and quantity. We're just gonna do 100 quantity. Okay, beer sold name lager beer. Okay, favorite beer. I don't want to bother with that now. Okay, this is the stage. Okay, so this is what we have now. Okay, and I'm gonna take this object here, and so we will just do a very simple query here. Select ID, select name from. Okay, just a second. From beer sold. Where ID equals to ID is this, right? Okay, so let me see if it works. So this is lager beer. Let's look at the flag which we want to set. Go here, edit object. Okay, and we're gonna look at use something. Okay, include doc. Okay, this is what we are after. It's just going to do perfect. This is false, okay, because there's no document attached to this record yet, okay, because it's blank. Okay, pretty straightforward, right, so far. Okay, let's start writing trigger now. So I can do my entire coding here, right? But that's a very bad practice. The first thing, the rule number one, never write your business logic inside a trigger. It's a rubbish code. It's a rubbish way of doing it because the testing gets harder. If you wanted to reuse your code, you can't use it, okay? The biggest thing you have to understand when you're doing a programming, you have to avoid duplication. That's the first thing. Please do not duplicate your code. That is a crappy way of coding, right? I have seen in my experience in different programming languages, starting with C++, .NET, Delphi. There are a lot of crap code out there. It's like a spaghetti code, what we call it. You copy paste here, copy paste here, copy paste here. That's just a garbage. That's not how we should code, right? So that's one of the things I'm trying to do in Apex. At least people write a better code so that we have better code out there, right? Because it's easy to slip, right, when you're under pressure. But that's not a very good practice because it's very difficult to maintain the code going forward, right? That's why when I see a code, spaghetti code, I straight away reject it because that's, you have to use a very proper design pattern. Like I said, I'm afraid I can't cover that today because due to time constraint, but I'll try to cover it in a very simple way, so that you don't have code duplication, okay? Right, so what we're going to do, so we will create a separate class, okay? So what we do, so we will create a separate class here. We can call it as content doc, or you can say update beer sold. Okay, so yeah, this will do for now. All right, so now what I'm going to do public static void update information. Okay, this is very simple stuff I'm going to do. I'm going to do list of content trigger. Okay, it's going to do this. Okay, content doc list. Okay, all right, let me do this. All right. Why this is a problem here? Oh, sorry. Yeah, because there's no such thing called content document trigger, right? Okay. All right. Okay, now we're gonna write everything here. I mean, I should not be doing everything here, but I at least should be splitting further. But just to keep it simple, I'm gonna do everything here. Okay. My apologies in advance because I can't. Okay, you know what? Let's split it up. Okay. Let's split it up. So we're gonna do. So in this case, right, all you have to do, we just say update beer sold dot update information. Okay, trigger not new, right? Okay, now you must be wondering what the heck it is. What just happened? What is trigger.new? I never seen this before. Okay, so trigger.new actually represent list of this is exactly what the trigger.new represent here. So what that means is because you are doing after insert operation, right? So trigger.new will contain a latest version of the data, okay, which you're inserting. In this case, you will get the inserted data, okay? So let's say I want to insert 1, 2, 3 into database, right? So the trigger.new will contain 1, 2, 3 because these are the new data, okay? In simple terms, okay? So instead of this, you can do trigger.new. It's pretty much the same. All right. So trigger.new will vary from trigger to trigger. Okay. So in this case, it's a list of content document link. But if you are doing a trigger on a contact, the trigger.new will represent list of contact. So since if you look at this code, right, we are inside this content document code because you're writing a trigger on a content document link. Okay. I repeat again. So this is a trigger code belonging to this object. Okay. This code will not belong to any other object because you are explicitly saying here, create a trigger on this object. Okay. You're not saying create a trigger on contact. Okay. So in that case, trigger.new will always represent to this. Just to keep it simple, trigger.new, just look at on what object your trigger is created. In this case, content document link. So this makes pretty sense, right? So it's a list of content document link. Okay. So you can't use this code from let's say you have a um, trigger written on a contact. You can't use this code from a contact. You can't go to a contact and say update information. Let's say if I do this something, let's say it's a contact one. Okay, you can't do this here because your params is expecting list of content document link. It's not expecting list of contacts, right? So that's why you know uh, this code will only work for this object. Okay. Um, so now what we're gonna do, we're gonna do let's create a. Now you must be wondering what is a static keyword. Okay. You remember when I talked about objects, right? When I talked about class as an object. Let me give you an example here. See this contact C equals to new contact C, right? So this is exactly what a class, right? So let's say we have a class, okay? Let me give you a very simple example. Just say, um, so we have, let's say you have a class called class name. Say this is a class name, okay? Assume it's a class and class A, okay? And then you create an object of a class and you do something like this, class one, right? You remember I talked about this many times? And if the class one has a method called display, so you normally do a.display, okay, right? But if you write something called public static, right? If you do something called static, then you do not have to create an object, right? That's the beauty of it. So let's say this one is a static method, something like this, right? Public static void display. So you don't have to do any of this code. All you have to do, you write the class name dot display. That's all it is, right? That is exactly what I've done here, right? I've done class name, okay, and this one, okay. Imagine if it's not a static field, okay, if it's something like this, okay, then what would have happened? I have to do something like this, update, beer sold s equals to new, update beer sold, whatever, right? And then I have to do s dot, this update information, something like this, trigger dot new, right? I don't want it to do that because I wanted to create a static method. I don't want to create an object here. So, instead of that, you use the static method. And once you use the static method, right? Okay, and you use the static method, this is how it works. It's pretty straightforward, right? And you save it. Okay, that's how static method works. Okay, I hope that explanation is clear. Let me save it again. For whatever reason, it didn't save it. Now let's see why it's not saving. Okay. All right, maybe that's why. Yeah, sometimes it takes time. It's just the org can be. Okay, so that's all well and good, okay? Now, let me create another method here. So what we're gonna do? We're gonna create another method called get employee. Sorry, not employee. Beer sold ID list. Okay, get sold ID. Get beer sold info. Right. So this is everything to do with the beer sold. Right. So we're gonna do public. Okay, we're gonna do static. Not the void. We're gonna do list of IDs. Okay, and say get ID. I'm gonna do list of. Okay, so what we do, we're gonna do here, content document here, right? Okay, no, that's not what I wanted. That's not what I wanted. That's not what I wanted. This is what I wanted. Okay, we're gonna do this here. We're gonna do here. Okay, so what we're gonna do for content document link. Okay, so we're gonna do C link. Okay, and we're gonna do content document list. So see this one, this ID is generic, content document link, right? So you can have an attachment for a contact, you can have an attachment for an account, you can have an attachment for a custom object, right? So I don't want every ID. I only want the ID which belongs to the beer sold, right? Because this object will store the attachment for pretty much every object, right? So I have to segregate only the beer sold, okay? So what I'm going to do, there is something called clink dot link entity ID, okay? This is where the Salesforce ID of an object gets stored. In other words, the beer sold object gets stored. Or in other words, this specific ID gets stored. It's for this specific object. The same goes for the contact. Okay, so what we're gonna do, we'll just do ID link entity. Okay, we're just gonna do this. Okay, so we're gonna do link entity. Forgot the name of this one. Dot get Salesforce object type equals to, what's the name of this one? Beer sold dot forgot what's the get. Let me see. Okay, let me see. Get this object type. If I'm mistaken, let me see. I mean, I don't remember the method top of my head. I mean, if I don't know, I just Google it. So let's see if this works. If not, then I have to Google this. If it's the name, if it's something, this schema dot beer sold something s object type. Maybe this one. Hopefully it works. Let's see. If not, then we'll sort it out. Okay. Oh crap. What? Sorry. Linked. All right. Okay, that's great. Now, I'm just gonna do return. Bear with me. I'll explain to you what I'm trying to do. Okay, so that's all. Let me do the code first, then I'll explain to you. Okay. it's easy for me. See that way. List of ID beer sold. Come on. Okay, I'm just gonna do this. Beer sold. Dot add. And I'm just gonna do identity ID. Yeah, that's gonna do this. And it's gonna do right. As usual, I always like to do try. Because the code catch, right, exception ex. Okay, I'm just going to do return null. System.debug ex.get message. Just format your code. I am going to explain to you what I'm trying to do. Okay. All right. So what I'm trying to do here. Okay. So I'm trying to get an ID. The list of IDs for the beer sold. Now you must be wondering why I'm doing this. Okay. So in a trigger, right? Never assume that you will get only one record at a time. Right. That's not the case. You might import a data using a data loader. Right. That could happen, right? When you import a data using data loader, you might be getting 1,000 records at a time. So you have to always factor into consideration that you will be getting more than one record. That's why I am doing here the list of it. Okay, so I assume that I'll be getting more than one. That's an assumption, because please do not assume you will get the one record, because if you do that, you're gonna end up in a pitfall. Okay, like I said, someone will be doing an upload using a data loader, so it can break the code. Okay, so the same way, I have to get the beer sold info in a collection, right? Because I wanted to make sure that, I wanted to make sure I cater for a scenario where if we have more than one beer sold information. Okay, so what I'm doing here, okay, I'm getting this object. Okay, content document link. As I said, content document link is an object which store information about your attachment. Okay, so it contains the linked ID which points to which object it is, and so that's exactly what I'm after, because so what I'm trying to see. So I'm actually excuse me, I have created a collection here. Okay, so line number 6, because I assume that it will be more than one ID, right? So that's the assumption I have. And then I have, I'm looping through the content document link, because, as usual, it's a list. Okay, because by now, you should know how to loop through the list, because I've talked about it, right? If you haven't watched it, please watch the looping through the collection. It's very important if you don't understand how the collection looping works. Okay, then I'm getting a ID, because this is the ID which actually store the ID of a S object. Could be a contact, could be a beer sold, could be any custom object, or could be any standard object, right? But I wanted to deal only with the beer sold. I'm not interested in accounts. I'm not interested in contact. I'm not interested in opportunity. I'm not interested in orders. I'm not interested in products. I'm not interested in anything else. I'm only interested in beer sold. So, but I have to make sure that the ID what I'm getting, right, it belongs to the beer sold. I shouldn't be picking up an ID which belongs to contact or something else, right, and looping through it, because that will be disaster, right? So, because it will error out, first of all, okay, it won't work. So, so what's gonna happen here, okay? So I'm actually looking linked entity, which is an ID dot is a get object type. So I'm getting a get S object type, which will say if it's a beer sold, if it's a contact, or whatever, and then I'm comparing with the actual beer sold object to the S object type. Okay. So if these two matches, right, then I can safely assume that this ID belongs to the beer sold. Okay. So what I'm doing, I'm putting into a collection here, a list of IDs, and returning the ID. That's all I'm doing here. So I'm going to call this code here. Okay, and I'm going to do list of IDs. List of ID, beers sold ID. okay, equals to dot. You're gonna do what's it called? Sorry, this get ID. Okay, get ID, and I'm gonna do pass this. Okay. All right. Let's put it in the try catch. Okay, because I like to put all my code in the try catch. It's good to do error handling. You can create your own custom exception as well, but I'm not gonna do that for now. It'll be too much for this session. Okay. So you're gonna Control A and Shift Tab. That will arrange it. Okay. So in this code, what I'm doing, I'm calling this class. Okay. And since we're dealing with the static method, I talked about static method, right? So this is a static method, right? So we won't create an instance of an object. What I meant by that, we won't do get beer sold info GB equals to new get beer sold info, then GB dot. We won't do that because if it's a static method, then you can directly access it. Get beer sold info dot get ID. That's how the static method works, right? Makes sense so far, right? Okay, so I got the list of ID which I wanted. So this will return me the list of IDs. Okay, so this is a list of IDs here. Okay, now what I'm going to do, I'm going to do if beer sold, okay, dot size is greater than 0, because I wanted to check if it contains any ID. Okay, because I don't want the trigger to be executed if there's nothing, right? So this is just a check, because I'm checking that if collection contains any items, right? Because size is a property, is a method of the collection of a list. I mean, if it's not greater than 0, so we don't want to do anything here. Okay, so what we're going to do now, we assume that we have data here. Okay, so what we do, we go here, we take this boy here. Okay, and we're going to do list of years old here. So I wanted to get information from this it's a BSC. Okay, BSC list. Okay, equals to select ID. What's the name of that that damn thing which we dealt with? What's the name of that field? Include doc, because this is the field which we're after, right? Right, so we're going to do ID. Okay, from beer sold. Okay, where ID in, where's one? Okay, now I explained to you what I'm doing. Okay, don't worry. I know it's a bit tricky. You see, you can do two ways SQL query. Okay, you can do select ID from an object where ID equals to, right? So if you are comparing one ID, where ID equals to, right? So you are testing against one ID, right? But what if you have 50 IDs? You can't do select. You can't write 50 SQL query. Right? That will be very inefficient way of doing stuff, right? So what we do, we put in a collection like we did here, okay? So we can do something called in, okay? So we are checking whether, whether your ID from beer sold belong to the ID we have here. So in other words, it's telling the beer sold, get me the records belonging to the IDs which are uh, inside beer sold ID list. Or let me show you what I mean by that. Okay, let me explain to you here. Let me do this here. Okay, so let's say we have an ID here. Okay, we have an ID here, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so you have a choice. You can do something like that. Select ID from, say, let's say for an S object, whatever, right, where ID equals to 1. Or you can do select ID from S object where ID equals to 2, right? This is, and then you have to do similarly for, you have to do for, and don't worry, I'll just clean it up. So you have to do for 4, you have to do for 3, right? Look at it, how inefficient it is, right? If you have 50 of them, you have to do for 50, right? Instead, what we do, right? So we do something like, so let me copy this. So we do something instead of that. We put all this value into collection, like you do. We put into collection, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And then we compare. That is what we did here. The list of it, right? The collection here. So this is something. This actually matches to list of ID. Let's say this equals to beer sold. Okay. For just assume it for now. Okay. Now then we can do something like that. Select ID from S object where ID in this, right? This is all we're doing it. Instead of this, I just used beer sold. And this is syntax. You have to put this colon here, right? That's all I did. Okay. Because you get, instead of doing, 5 so-called query, you're doing in a one. Okay. And you're getting the result back in a collection, because the reason why you have to use the return statement as a collection here, because you are dealing with more than one ID. So you will get more than one ID. Okay. I hope that's clear. Okay. Right. Now, what we're going to do, we need a beer sold object here. Beer sold collection equals to new. Just copy this here. I know it's a little bit confusing because if you're doing this for the first time, but trust me, it's not too bad, right? And you might encounter the scenario. You might get the scenario as well, because attachments are very common, right? So I'm not doing anything super complicated or fancy, just the basic thing, right? I've done very complicated stuff on triggers, but that being said, my preference is not to use code, right? If I can do things using Flow, I will stick to Flow. Or if I can do stuff using Process Builder, I can stick to Process Builder. Or I'm a workflow, so I don't normally use it very often, because I have used it in the past for sending outbound messages. But yeah. Okay, sorry, I digress. So what we're gonna do, we have to loop through this BSO, right? Because we got a collection here. Okay. So okay, just a second. Let's just do, so you're gonna do beer, basic list, right? Oh, come on. At times is a pain, right? So we're gonna do B dot. Oh man, come on. Include dog equals to true. Okay. Now, if you remember, I talked about never ever do insert operation in the for loop. You should bulkify your code, right? So that's the reason why I created this boy here, right? Beer sold collection. So we're gonna do this add B, okay, and we're gonna do database dot update, okay. I'm just gonna do beer collection. I want to do partial update because I don't want everything to fail. Whatever fails, it's okay. I mean, we can deal with that, and you can do, it's just, and always good to get list of, database dot save result. Okay, and we can solve result set. Okay, you can always do system.debug result set. For now, it's fine. Okay, so it's pretty straightforward. Okay, let me walk you through the entire code again, and then we'll do the stuff in action. Okay, it may work, may not work, right? Because it's not necessary that code will work for the first time. And then if it, for whatever reason, if it fails, we can debug it. Okay, so that's the best option. That's why I do like Visual Studio Code, because there is an interactive debugging there. It's very easy to do that. I could use Visual Studio probably, for more advanced stuff. But I thought, for this small stuff, I can use, Developer Console. Okay, so our code starts here, right? Nice and easy, pretty straightforward. 2 lines of code. So I created a trigger on this boy here, okay, and I've used this code, okay. So now, so the reason why I did this, it's very easy to test your code, okay, because if I wanted to use, let's say I wanted to use this piece of a code elsewhere, I can pretty much do that, right? Imagine, right? Think about a scenario. Think about for a minute, right? You write all this piece of code here, right? See how tightly coupled that is? That's a pretty bad way of doing a code. Your code should be decoupled, right? You should always code towards abstraction, right? That's where yeah, I mean, I don't want it to get into design pattern. Then I'm gonna start talking about dependency injection. Then you might wonder what the heck this guy talking about. Okay, my apologies. I'll take a step back. Okay, so to keep it simple, right? I wanted to have a separation of concern. What I meant by that is here, I do not want to put every logic inside a trigger because I want to reuse this code. You might have to reuse it for whatever reason in the future, right? So you have to write a code in such a way with an assumption you might reuse your code, okay? Reuse the code, okay? Right. So I've did this, okay? And so beer sold, okay? I am doing in this stuff. My class says beer update beer sold. So this class is doing only that. Okay, it's not. It's doing nothing uh, about content document link because it's got nothing to do with the content document, right? Right. So that's why I created a separate class, get beer sold info, right? So I'm getting this stuff from content document link, right? It's a separate logic, right? So if you wanted to use this class separate, you can do that as well. In this class, all it's doing, it's getting me a list of IDs from a content document link which belongs to beer sold object. Okay, that's all it's doing, and that's all I'm calling it here because there's no business logic around. There's no code logic here. I'm using it like a black box. Okay, and then I'm actually once I get the ID here, I'm looping through the ID. Okay, so to get the information about the beer sold, right? So I use the so-called query here to get the beer sold information. Okay, um, and then I'm looping through that collection, and then I'm updating the value here. Okay, that's all I'm doing here. And if you remember, I talked about database insert, how it works, partial commit. There's a video I've done that before. If you haven't watched any of this video, then I'm afraid if you're new to Apex, then this is not the right video for you. I will not encourage you to watch it because you will feel like a Greek and Latin, right? You might even wonder what the heck this is happening here, right? That's why it's very important to understand pre stuff, right? Prerequisite is you should know how the collection works, how um, the database insert works, right? Database update works, database operation, right? So how to do a for loop inside a collection, right? So this is very important, okay? And how the classes work as well. So that's why I wanted to do trigger the last. Okay, so that's the code. So let's run let's try to attach it and let's see if it works. If it doesn't work, then we can, obviously you can um, do the code debugging. Okay, upload the file. I'll just do some dummy data update. Okay. Oh, okay. It did something. Okay. Now let's see. Um. So we have this false. Okay. Close this. Close this. Keep the finger crossed. Oh, wow, that's true. That's exactly what it is. Okay, let's do one more example just to, test it. Okay, because you might be thinking, oh, this guy might have faked something. Okay, let's do one more stuff. All right, strong beer, right? And we're gonna do porter. I mean, if you're a porter fan, I'm a porter fan, but I'm not drinking for since past 2 months. I'm trying to detoxify it. I had enough alcohol last year. I mean, I decided that I just want to take a break. So I'm not drinking for this entire year, just my detoxification year, whatever you call it. So no alcohol for me this year, but I love to talk about beer, right? As you can see from my previous videos, how much passionate I'm about beer. I'm not a whiskey lover, vodka lover, whatever, but beer, yeah, any day, but not this year. Okay, so porter beer. So we're gonna do prospects here. Okay. All right. So we created this. Okay. So I wanted to take this ID here, and so we will run this. Okay. Oh, come on. Okay, let me close this. Hopefully. All right, it's false. Okay, fantastic here. Now let me go to the attachment, upload the file. Okay, and done here. Okay, and so I'll close it. Otherwise, it will be in a cache. True, fantastic, right? So our trigger is working. That's exactly what I wanted to do for triggers. So this is why the triggers are powerful. So you can see this is a complex piece of, well, not really complex, but it's a it's a decent piece of a code which you can do using a trigger. You can do using a flow, but I haven't done this using a flow. Possible, would be possible. Flows are very powerful, but the reason why I wanted to display using the code because, as I said, this is an Apex session. So you should know how to use a trigger because at times you might have to use it, right? For whatever reason, code is important, right? If you wanted to be a great Salesforce gladiators, right, you have to understand how the code works, okay? Unless you wanted to stick to purely functional. That's all well and good. But if you wanted to be a technical person, you have to know how to code. There's no exception to that rule, I'm afraid. Right. That being said, I hope you enjoyed today's topic. I know that my apologies. I've dragged a bit longer than I anticipated, but I wanted to make sure you guys understand it. Again, I cover most of the stuff. Right. So I hope you guys have a great Saturday wherever you are, whichever part of the world you are. I mean, at least in New Zealand, it's kind of rainy because we are in the autumn now. Okay. That being said, greetings and adios. Take care. Bye bye.